Okay. So we just got some really huge news, very big news, even in a time of crazy news, and that is that Trump has fired his Secretary of Homeland Security, Kristi Noem. Now there have been rumors about this for a very long time, and there have been many moments where he should have fired her. I mean, she's been overseeing a department that oversees ICE that has been terrorizing communities, including Minneapolis, which we've all been watching in horror for the last several weeks. Now, that's not reportedly, though, why he fired her. Reportedly, why he fired her is because he just learned, but we knew about this for a while, about a more than $200 million ad campaign that she was using government resources for to promote herself and also to benefit the husband of her close aide, Tricia McLaughlin. Yes, the mouthpiece of mouthpieces, Tricia McLaughlin. Her husband benefited from this more than $200 million ad campaign. And that detail, which she was asked about in these disastrous hearings this week, reportedly is what pushed Trump over the edge, of course. But during these hearings, there were also some crazy moments that were a reminder of exactly who Kristi Noem is. And one of them was during a grilling by Senator Thom Tillis, Republican from North Carolina, leaving, but he absolutely had her have it about quite a topic, which is her killing of her dog. So I just want to play part of it.
A 14-month-old dog is basically a teenager in dog years. You decided to kill that dog because you had not invested the appropriate time in training, and then you have the audacity to go into a book and say it's a leadership lesson about tough choices. Those are bad decisions made in the heat of the moment, not unlike what happened up in Minneapolis.
All right, Thom Tillis. I'm here for the no F's Thom Tillis. He has no F's to give. He's leaving the Senate. But if that story sounds familiar, but you're like, what, she killed her dog? This was not something that was reported by an investigative journalist hiding in the bushes or some aide who was mad at Kristi Noem. She literally wrote about it in her book. And I just have to play, no one can describe it better than Kristi Noem herself, the details of this story.
As I drove home, I realized that I had no choice. Cricket was untrainable, and after trying to bite me, dangerous to anybody that she came in contact with. At that moment, I realized I had to put her down. As I pulled into the driveway, I decided I had to deal with this problem myself. This was my dog, and it was my responsibility, and I would not ask somebody else to clean up my mess. I stopped the truck in the middle of the yard. I got out my gun, grabbed Cricket's leash, and I led her out into the pasture and down into the gravel pit. It was not a pleasant job, but it had to be done. I guess if I were a better politician, I wouldn't be telling the story right now.
I mean, so many thoughts about that particular story, which I was aware of, but any human being would respond to that and think, wow, that's a little wacky. You took your own dog out because you couldn't train it and you killed it, and then you wrote about it in your book. There we go. That's Kristi Noem. Now, you would think maybe the people who were vetting her for the Department of Homeland Security didn't know about this. Maybe Trump learned about this just recently, too. If you think that, you would be wrong, because there's also another detail that came out just this week from a couple of excellent reporters that I just have to mention, too. So McKay Coppins, he wrote a piece about this, and he wrote basically that I'm just going to read this because it is so telling about everything happening in this administration. Trump had reportedly considered tapping Noem to be his running mate in 2024, but her name was crossed off the short list after she disclosed in a memo that she had shot an untrainable family dog years earlier. Okay, so they did know about it. Off the short list she goes. The story prompted widespread outrage and ridicule, and many observers assumed it sank her prospects of an administration post, as they should. I mean, I was a part of vetting lots and lots of people for administration jobs over the course of years, and if somebody was a little bit late on their taxes, they were often crossed off the list, okay? But no, according to Julie Ainsley, who is another excellent reporter, she reported that Trump actually saw this particular biographical detail as an asset in his Homeland Security secretary. It was one of the reasons he chose her. So he learns about her shooting the dog off the VP list. But boy, does that slightly psychotic aggression feel like a good quality for the Secretary of Homeland Security? Sure does. Helped her get the job, which kind of tells you everything you need to know. Now, in all of this is poor Cricket the dog. Rest in peace, Cricket. And as much as this story is horrible and disturbing. There are a couple people who have had a little fun with it. And one of them is Congressman Jared Moskowitz, who somehow, maybe he got it made, maybe he found it. There he is. Justice for Cricket, a Justice for Cricket pin. I would love one of those pins because it's great and the story tells you so much. So now Kristi Noem's out, not because of the dog, not because she terrorized communities across the country, but apparently because Donald Trump is pissed off about her. I don't know if it's spending government resources, if it's the fact that her aide benefited from it, if it's just that it's promotional for her. If it was about him, would he care? Probably not. But that's reportedly why. So who replaces her? Well, there's a guy named Senator Markwayne Mullin. He is the junior senator from the state of Oklahoma. And if you're wondering, what are his qualifications for being the Secretary of Homeland Security, or I guess Senator? His qualifications, other than being a former mixed martial arts fighter, not really clear. But we do know one thing it is not, and that is his public speaking ability, because he's been very outspoken this week on Iran, perhaps to impress his new daddy. But I just want to play for you what he had to say about Iran.
This is war, and we're taking out the threat.
You'll concede this is war. You'll concede this is war.
We haven't declared war. They declared war on us, but we haven't.
War. Secretary Hicks said
We haven't declared.
Just now you said this is war.
They called it war.
They called it war. What I was saying. Okay, well that was a misspoke.
So much there. Called it a war, denied it was a war. He had just said it and then said it was a misspoke. Well, ladies and gentlemen, that is the new nominee to be the Secretary of Homeland Security at a time when we are literally at war with Iran. There we are. And of course, all of this is going on while we're in the middle of a war that Donald Trump started. And one of the things, of all of the things that has stuck out to me, is just how freaking out of touch all of these people in the Trump administration are. There are so many of them to list, but I just want to start with the First Lady, Melania Trump, because we are now nearly a week into a war with Iran that Donald Trump started. And yet they made this decision. I do not know who made this decision. I don't know who kept this thing on the schedule, but she showed up to it for Melania Trump, the First Lady, to preside over UN Security Council meeting focusing on children in conflict zones. Now, she presided over this meeting on Monday, which was 2 days after the war started. And it was also just 2 days after a girls' school in Iran was struck, killing 160 girls. And yet, there she was, presiding over the meeting like nothing had happened, like she was some sort of substantive contributor to the administration, and without any seeming reference in her mind to the fact that there was a war her husband started 2 days ago that had literally killed children. And I just have to show you part of this meeting because it is so out of touch.
Good afternoon. The 10,113 meeting of the Security Council is called to order. The provisional agenda for this meeting is maintenance of international peace and security, children, technology, and education in conflict. The agenda is adopted.
I mean, I'm glad your makeup is on point, but a meeting, presiding over a meeting about children in conflict while 160 girls were just killed in Iran in a strike your husband killed. Well, it's very freaking out of touch. Okay, speaking of people who are really making bizarre choices, awkward choices about how they're publicly communicating about this war, is none other. Listen, the First Lady, she's not in the National Security Council. She's not in these meetings. That was bizarre. But the Vice President of the United States is in all these meetings. That guy has a seat at the table. He can share his views, and he certainly has them. He's also the first in line to the presidency, and there's a war again his boss started. And he, first of all, we just learned that his team canceled a town hall that CBS News was going to hold a week and a half from now, the end of next week. Guess when a good time to do a town hall meeting or an Oval Office address or something? When your administration has started a war and you can answer questions, because people have a lot of questions and they're wondering a lot of things, like, are their kids going to be sent to war? What does this all mean? How's it going to impact all of us? How much is going to cost? And people are scared, and they will be. And the public is very much against this war. But yet he canceled it a week and a half in advance and blamed it on the war. Now, I think there's a lot more to it than that, because J.D. Vance has not spoken very much publicly about this over the course of just under a week. And when he did speak publicly on Monday and he was asked about it, here's what J.D. Vance had to say.
So he saw that the Iranian regime was weakened. He knew that they were committed to getting on that brink of a nuclear weapon, and he decided to take action because he felt that was necessary in order to protect the nation's security.
First of all, you're not the press secretary. You're the vice president of the United States of America. Why are you referring to he? Did you notice he used he 4 times? He's basically punting this whole thing to Donald Trump. And sure, it was ultimately, it always is the decision of the president of the United States. But J.D. Vance is the vice president of the United States. He's the number 2 person in charge of the United States. And he just answered that question about a war that is extremely costly, that 6 Americans have already died as a result of, that hundreds of people in Iran have already died of, that has spread around the Middle East and is causing significant issues there and significant tensions there. He answered these questions like he's an observer of the problem, like he's an analyst, not that he's the vice president of the United States. Now, along with this, the way he just answered that was just so telling. He also had someone from his team, and I know this must have been someone from his team because I have been a part of giving reporters information a lot of times. And he had someone from his team say that he leaned against military attacks personally, arguing that a limited strike was a mistake because he wanted people to know, probably in the MAGA base, that he's not really for this. But he's obviously not going to say that publicly because he doesn't want Trump to be mad at him. But he wants to send a little message to the MAGA base. And also that if the United States was going to hit Iran, he told the group it should go big and go fast, whatever in the hell that means. So that's J.D. Vance's profile and courage about a war that his administration has started, all happening right now. He's trying to kind of walk this tightrope walk. I don't think he's going to be able to walk it, but that's his very muddled attempt to do that so far this week. I just want to end on kind of a positive note because there were primaries this week in Texas and in North Carolina and in Arkansas, a bunch of places. And what's interesting about it is that we're starting to learn who these candidates are who could potentially be a part of a new class of members of Congress in the House and the Senate who could win back control of the House and Senate. And some of them are not at all typical politicians. A lot of them are not, because people hate Washington. Most people hate Washington right now and want people who have a fresher, different background. So one of the people who really is such a good example of this is this guy named Bobby Polito, he just won the primary in Texas's 15th district. It's this strip of Texas. It's so gerrymandered, you can't even describe it. But what's so interesting about this guy is that he is a very well-known, he's a Latin Grammy winner. He's a very well-known Tejano musician, and he's very popular in the community, but not because of his political background and not because there he is winning his Latin Grammy, not because he sat on a school board, that's important too, or that he was a mayor, that's important too, but that's not his background. It's because he's a very, very popular musician. And that is such a fun thing. It reminds me a lot of 2006, I was working at the Democratic Congressional Campaign Committee, and we were recruiting candidates who were just not traditional politicians, former football players, former teacher, people who just didn't come from the typical mold, because it's really about the person fitting their district. And this guy is super fun because he's so popular. He could actually beat, there's a woman named Monica De La Cruz, who's the sitting incumbent Republican. It's a Republican district, but he has a real shot here. And that is so interesting. And I just want to play part of one of his rallies. He's been having these big rallies because this seems so fun and like some of the spirit that we actually need in this town.
Te animes a tirar un rol conmigo, porque ya hace tiempo yo quiero salir contigo. Ojalá te animes y pierdas un poco el miedo. Chance y una chela nos echemos el domingo. Ojalá te animes a tirar un rol conmigo, porque ya hace tiempo yo quiero salir contigo. Ojalá te animes y pierdas un poco el miedo. Chance y una chela nos echemos el domingo. Ándale, güerita, no te hagas de rogar.
I mean, not a typical politician, but the kind of spirit we kind of need here.